one of my biggest takeaways from 2022, and that is Price's Law. And so Price's Law states that 50% of the production of any domain is produced by the square root of the domain. Right, so what does that mean? That means, okay, for instance, it's really fascinating if you start with small numbers, right? Because 2 times 2 is 4, so the square root of 4 is 2, right? So 2 times 2 is 4, okay, cool. Which means 50% of the production, if you have 4 salespeople, 50% of the production of that sales team is going to be done by 50%. Well, that seems to make sense. But when you take 3 times 3, now it changes. Because 3 times 3 is 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. So now, if you have 9 salespeople, the production of that sales organization is going to be produced by 3 people. 50% of the production of that sales organization is going to be produced by 30% of the people, or 33% of the people. Wait a minute. So the bigger the organization gets, the smaller the productive units get. By the way, this is some of the best news in the world for people who want to be successful. I'll tell you why in a minute. So if you take 5 times 5, right, or 4 times 4 is 16. So if you have 16, the square root of 16 is 4. Which means if you have 16 salespeople, half of the production is going to be produced by 4 people, right? And then the numbers keep getting bigger. If you go to 5, it's 25, and now 5%, 5 people are producing half of the results, right? So let's get to some really big numbers. 100. The square root of 100 is 10. So if you have 100 salespeople, 50% of the sales are going to be produced by 10 salespeople. So 90% of the people split the other 50%. And by the way, it's not just true with people, and it's not just true with sales. Like, it's literally a natural law. Like, if you have 9 tomato plants, 3 of the tomato plants will produce half the tomatoes of your garden, right? It just exists the way it is. And I love the fact that it's a principle, because we can learn something from a principle, right? And so here's what's amazing. Let's say you have 100 times 100, that's 10,000. So if you have 10,000 companies, right, 50% of the gross sales of those 10,000 companies, 50% of the profitability will be produced by 100 companies. Isn't that exciting? I'm going somewhere. Trust me. When the plane lands, you're gonna be so happy. It's gonna be like when you land a plane in Chicago and everybody starts clapping because you're like coming in like this, right? So if you have 1 million businesses in the United States, 50% of the gross domestic product will be produced by 1,000 companies. I want you to wrap your mind around what a small percentage 1,000 is of 1 million, but it's the square root of 1 million. So what do we learn from this that we can apply to our lives? Here's what we learn. Excellence scales incrementally. I'm going to say it again slower. Excellence scales incrementally, but mediocrity scales exponentially. Mediocrity, being average, is large scale. So a lot of people say, well, I'm going to solve income inequality, but the only problem, you can't, because Price's Law says that most people don't care enough to be something. They don't care enough to do something. They don't care enough to do more than average. The percentage of people that care enough to become more than average, do more than average, have more than average, gets smaller and smaller as the numbers of people get larger and larger. So excellence scales incrementally, and mediocrity scales exponentially. Now, which means we now have a choice. Like, I don't have to be a victim of circumstance, because there's almost no competition at the elite level. Because most people just don't care enough to be that elite. You think about how many basketball players there have been in the history of basketball, but how many like great ones have there been? Less than 20, right? And so when you think about this, we can have a decision, we can make a decision today. I am not going to be one of the mediocre many, I'm going to be one of the fantastic few. I can decide that. And people think, oh, but it's so hard. No, it's hard to stay at the bottom. At the bottom, everybody else on the bottom is jealous of you. At the top, everybody else at the top who's really at the top is celebrating you. Because they know if it's yours, they don't need it, and if it's theirs, you don't want it. Okay. So we're talking about being productive, right? And so make up your mind. Like, here's what's going to happen. All of us in this room, all of us watching on YouTube, all of us watching on Zoom, here's what's going to happen. We are either going to be one of the mediocre many, or we're going to be one of the fantastic few. But we decide that. No, society. No, don't you blame that on society. Because in every society, there have been people who have risen above their circumstance.